Welcome to episode 2 of More Than Just Maps. I am your host, Ollie Powers. This podcast was created with the intent to help anyone in the GIS field get from where they are now to where they want to be that your first job, a career move, or just improving your GIS game overall. Today we are continuing our interview with Tim Nolan and diving into the world of Scrum, Agile, Kanban, and most importantly, personal Kanban. Enjoy!
All right, and we're here for part 2 of the podcast with Tim Nolan. So Tim, at the end of the first session, we started talking about Agile. So you are kind of known, you're this big superstar with Kanban and personal Kanban and Agile. So, and you do webinars promoting this. I was actually in Canada, in Toronto, and your name was brought up multiple times at a conference. You're known everywhere for this stuff. So if you can kind of go into how you first got into Agile and how you that transition to Kanban and personal Kanban and how you're using that in your work at the county. And I think you even use it in your personal life a little bit. So, and just how that's helping you and how that's organizing everything and how that kind of goes and marries nicely with GIS and goes perfectly with our jobs.
Okay, so my introduction to Agile was from my CIO, Karen Skipworth. We were buying some software at the state level. So like I said, I at the time I was promoted as applications manager. So we're writing apps now. I have no concept or clue of Agile that it even exists. This is 2010 to kind of give it some time frame here. And
okay, so not too long ago.
Not too long ago, but still 10 years ago, 9 years ago. But she goes, you need to look into Agile. I'm like, well, what's that? So it's kind of rare that the highest member of your team tells you, but like I just said, if the highest member of your team tells you to do something, you probably need to go do it. So I started researching what Agile was, and the first thing that I did was I found some meetups. So we're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There's a huge Agile community here, and so there's lots of meetups. So I just started attending these things. And I noticed early that I was the only government person there. It's all mostly about business. So there became a challenge, not just Agile with GIS, but just Agile at a local government is still, even to this day, is still kind of new to many. But as I learned more about this and the idea, I started making connections of like, this isn't unlike my GIS part of my career, where I would sit down with customers and understand, like we were talking about earlier. Once we started doing Agile and doing projects with our app dev team, I started to try to introduce this to our GIS team. And anytime you change or try something different, everyone's a little suspicious, like, oh, is this the new thing that we're going to try? And like, let's just go through the motions. Let's just do what the boss says, that kind of thing. But I was really trying to pitch this as, I think this can help us. And so a year later, we started doing Agile for GIS. And the first thing I noticed was we had a lot of tasks on the board, on what we needed to get done. And none of those tasks were moving. We had a stand-up, which means, and what I heard at every stand-up was, well, I don't have time to get to the stuff that's on the board because I'm working on this. And what I kept trying to flesh out and try to get everyone to understand is whatever you're working on should be on the board. So the impression was, well, I've got my job to do, and then I've got this thing that Tim wants us to do. And I was, over time, it took a little while, but we began to blend all of the work. So one thing we notice in GIS is the thing about Agile first is you get to plan 2 weeks in advance, and then you do all the work within 2 weeks. That's called a sprint. In our case, we use Scrum here.
Yeah.
So I introduced that concept to GIS. Well, and they had very good questions. Well, I get calls every day on stuff. I don't know what I'm going to do. So you sort of have an idea at the beginning of the year or beginning of the quarter that here's the projects that I hope to work on, knowing that about 40 to 50% of your work is going to be ad hoc, like a phone call of, like I said, I'm in local government, so some elected official needs something for some meeting by tomorrow. We've all been there. Those happen. Yeah. There's a way, and there's a way to approach those kind of things. And over time, we figured it out. So we learned that, like we have one staffer here who's been here over 20 years, Ramona Luster. She's our GIS coordinator and is in charge of our rural addressing. She gets phone calls on an address every day. And now that we've been growing, we're over 1 million in population now. It's overwhelming how many phone calls we're getting on addresses that are people that are moving out into the country.
I didn't
So
realize
you have to,
it was that big out there.
Yeah, you have to talk to these people, right? We got Plano and Frisco and McKinney. I mean, they're very
Yeah.
fast growing cities.
That's true.
But you got to talk to people, right? There's no like, here's 3 questions and answers. So it may take Ramona an hour to get all the information she needs to help assign an address to that person. That's hard to plan for. So we learn that agile, right? The term agile really means flexible, is that we know that Ramona is only going to be available part of the time in this sprint because she's busy doing some of this other stuff. And we just kind of adjusted and figured out a way to make this work in 2-week increments. And now we love it, right? Now the GIS team and the app dev team love it. Well,
so how was it? How many times did you have to go through different iterations of it? I know I've worked before at a place where they tried to implement it, and I think we went through several iterations. I don't know if they're still using it or not, but it definitely went through multiple ways of trying to make it work. How many times did you guys try to make it work?
Okay, so part of that is there's a mantra in the Agile community: just be better than you were the last time. So if you could just improve a little bit. And so part of being an Agile mindset is like a retrospective, right? Now that we've had this sprint, or now that we've gone through this iteration, what can we do better next time? And as long as you're improving, like the first GIS sprint we had, where we got almost nothing done on the sprint, nothing, was that we learned that the staff thought that the sprint was for special projects, but my day-to-day work was not on the board. And we learned that we need to add all your day-to-day stuff as well as the new projects on the board, and then you spread them out, right? You can't get all of this done in a sprint, but you have to go through a couple of sprints to know your velocity or what you're capable of completing. Right. And so once we started doing that, and so I was about to mention that I have a records team, and they started using Kanban. So Kanban's a little bit different. It's not time box like Scrum or sprints are. It's still under the Agile umbrella. So Agile is kind of a mindset, a way of thinking or approaching problems. Scrum is a process or a framework. Kanban's another.
Yes.
And Kanban itself, it allows you to, what you really focus on is removing bottlenecks and creating flow. And
Kanban was originated from car factories, correct? So they would just kind of go in, put their work in, and then come out the other side.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, okay. It was invented by Toyota, as a matter of fact. And so the idea was minimize waste. How can we streamline this process? So something that came out of manufacturing became part of tech, right? So Kanban, Agile, all those types of things were really, manufacturing methods that we applied to developing software and building applications, things like that. So our records group started using this, and we actually had that. Remember, I told you I had a thought leader or someone I really respected. Well, we invited him out, so he was always interested on, like, I cannot believe my government is actually doing Agile stuff, and loved it. And nice. So they're very proud, and I've talked to some of the groups a little bit, and they're really impressed that the government is trying to do their best, because there's this notion of government that they're not innovative. In my opinion, maybe a whole other podcast. Innovation starts at government, in my opinion. But we asked that person to come and explain Kanban to us. And over the time, I thought, I think GIS would benefit from a Kanban process than they would Scrum, in a time box kind of thing. And so I invited records and I invited GIS. So records is having the same experience. Oh, great, my boss wants me to do something new. Yeah, we'll do it for a couple of weeks. And what I found, anything Agile, as long as you're able to just try it, do the experiment, I found that they like it. Oh, this works better for us. I'm trying not to force feed people, but I wanted to kind of discover this on their own. So records really enjoyed Kanban. So I was trying to convince GIS, Brett and his team, you might want to look at Kanban instead of Scrum. And so here's part of what the Agile mindset is. I didn't force Brett, you need to try Kanban now. You need to do that now. What I did was ask. And Brett's response was, no, we like Scrum. We're going to keep doing it this way. And that's fine.
Of course.
And now an Agile manager should go, very well. I've just offered, here's a suggestion, and you don't have to, so it's not command and control anymore. You're more of a servant leader in this case. So I've been doing that for years. And somewhere along the line, I stumbled across personal Kanban. So it's more of your own, like agile for one, right? Just ways to do things. So I to this day, probably for the past 4 or 5 years, I've had my personal Kanban board up, and it's just basically a visual to-do list. And and I keep it analog on stickies because I can move stuff around. I don't have to log in. Another cool thing about my work Kanban board, personal Kanban board, is it stays at work. So when I go home, unless I took a picture of it, I can't log in and process anything. So I almost have to come back to work to finish whatever work is on the board. It's also it's a visual contract too with your staff and your bosses. Is I'll have my boss walk in here and go, "Hey Tim, I need you to look at this." And while they're talking to me, I always have my pen and Post-it note on the ready. I'll write down what they asked me to do on a Post-it note, and I'll put it on my board. And they see me put it on the board. And if it's hot, I'll put it on maybe my doing section. So Kanban, if you simply look at it, to do, doing, and done. Or options, things that I want to do, things I need to do. So I'll put it, depending on how hot it is, they'll see, but they'll also see the work that I'm doing right now. And this applies to Scrum, Kanban, personal Kanban, because I'm visualizing the work that I'm doing, that you can have a conversation about it. What, I'd love to do this project, boss, but yesterday you asked me to do that, and it's already on the board and it's in my doing. What do I do, right? They guide you, but you don't have to be mean about it. Like, I don't have time, right? You're giving me too much work. You can just have a real simple conversation about it. Here's my list, and often they'll go, "Oh, finish that, and then do this when you have time." And then now you've planned the work, right? Now it's in my to-do list instead of my doing list. And that's usually how your to-do, your handwritten to-do list, it works. But the problem with that one is it's linear, right? You write it down in kind of an order. And sometimes the fourth or fifth thing on your list is the thing that you have to do now instead of the first thing on the list.
Yeah, I know that when we first started with it, we did it wrong the first time we did it. We'd have the kind of wish list items and then what we were actually working on. And of course, everyone's working on 7 or 8 things at the same time, and it wasn't effective. And we finally realized this is not how this is supposed to work. We have to put everything in this column, and only the things we're actually getting done right now is going to go in this column. So
what you experienced was a bottleneck, right?
Yeah.
Too many people were working on too much stuff. So you had to work on the flow, right, to get that traffic going a little bit better. And never say you're wrong, right? Because you improve, right? And what I told you about Agile and the Agile mindset is if you're just better the next time than you were the first time. And it sounds like that's exactly what y'all went through, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it could be a disaster, but as long as the next time is not as bad as a disaster, then that's an improvement. Yeah. And then you just keep working in that direction. And if you keep thinking that way, then you don't think about it as work anymore. It's just the way we do things now. And so a quick story about personal Kanban was I was at the GIS Pro 2018 in Palm Springs, California. It's fantastic. It's URISA's US. I love that conference. I really do. Another podcast, we'll talk all about that stuff.
I've yet to go to that.
I love the people. I love the energy. There's a youth movement there. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I get, there's another thing that I do called Lean Coffees. Adam Cornell does Lean Coffees. It's just a really cool way to have a meeting. And so that was my session. And we had a good session. Everything was great. Well, Ashley Hitt, she's one of the board members for URISA, a fantastic person. She goes, "Hey, Tim, because I hear you like to talk. We had someone cancel tomorrow, and I need 10 minutes of something to kind of fill in some of the space." And so I wanted to challenge myself. Yeah, I've got all kinds of PowerPoint stuff I can put together. I could talk about Agile as a GIS, but every time I've tried giving an Agile talk at a GIS conference or an IT conference, everybody gives me the same kind of pushback. Well, that works if you have a team of people, and I didn't want, if you don't have a team, then it doesn't, and they blow me off, right? But personal Kanban became like, well, hey, this is something that everybody can do. Yeah. So I didn't realize what I was kind of stepping into when I did this. So I did 10 minutes, and it was great. I mean, it was only 10 minutes, and I got a lot of good feedback, positive feedback. It was a fun little presentation that I gave. It was not designed in any way, right? It was just, I just put up a Kanban board and just pointed at one slide and just talked about that. When I knew this was something, that was say less on a Thursday. by Monday, people are tweeting to me their photos of their boards that they made the first time, immediately when they got in the office.
Oh my gosh.
I thought, this is crazy. You know, and I mean, literally like 3 people Monday morning sends me, I was in your session, check out my board. And they're proud of it. And then they're able to talk about it. You know, they're like, and here's what I'm doing, you know, because now they can say everything that they're working on at a glance. Think about it like a map, right? Remember when we made maps as GIS people, right? A picture tells 1,000 words. You know, when you have all of your work there, then you can make sense of it. You know, it's not in your head anymore. Now it's out there in the wild, and you can do more stuff with it. So there was a lot of good energy for that first 10 minutes of that presentation, first personal Kanban presentation I ever gave. Since then, I've probably given at least 8 presentations in a 12-month period of time on personal Kanban.
Just on personal Kanban.
It resonated, right? Now I have Agile for one. It's not a team. I don't get blown off anymore. I'm like, this helps you.
Yes.
You can do this right now. And just a little aside, the first time I gave a webinar on this was with Toby Soto's, the GIS Peer Success Group. Mm-hmm. And I was the featured speaker on there, and I was putting together some kind of presentation. I wasn't sure what, and a procrastinator, again, sort of ironic that a personal Kanban guy is a procrastinator, but it helps me. But I remember reaching out to Tony Ann De Maria, who is the co-author of the personal Kanban book, the people who created personal Kanban, or this concept as I knew it.
Yes.
And I was on LinkedIn. I'm like, you know, it's a long shot. Hey, tomorrow I'm doing a presentation. Do you mind if I use your likeness, right? Your profile. She just happened to be on and responded back, absolutely. What are you working on? I'm like, hey, I'm doing this webinar tomorrow. It's like, send me the link. Now I'm freaking out, right? Because now the person who created personal Kanban wants to.
He's about to watch you talk about her.
Am I doing this right? You know, now, you know, it's like
a little bit of pressure to make it
exactly. And she was great, right? We couldn't quite figure out the tech to bring her on, but she had some very good feedback because she describes and talks about the neuroscience of Kanban. Like you know, you hear this all the time about, you know, social media. People love it because they get a dopamine hit every time they get a like or thing, and people become addicted to that. Well, Kanban's the same way, right? Every time you mark something off your to-do list, if it's written down, or if you have a personal Kanban board and move it to done, you get that dopamine hit, and you can actually turn that into a habit, right? Where you're just basically high on productivity, right? High on efficiency, yes. Where you can just keep finishing things and it feels awesome. And she explains, here's what's happening in the brain when this does that. So she was great. And then we had the Eureka, Texas personal Kanban. That was my favorite presentation on Kanban I've ever given.
Yeah, and you actually had Torianne on that one. She was able to present with you.
She was fabulous, you know, and we also had Sean from Annapolis, Sean Wampler from Annapolis, who she was present at the 10-minute version of this talk that I gave a year ago. So it was nice to kind of get her perspective as kind of new to Kanban, me, and then the creator of personal Kanban. So it was that was my favorite session, and it became my thing.
It was an excellent webinar. I'm so upset we lost the recording.
Well, let's do it again. We'll do it again and record it.
We can do it again.
I've got now a lifelong relationship with the personal Kanban folks. Sean, everyone that's been part of the session. Yeah. We had a session in the GIS Pro. I pitched, you know, because I've been kind of refining this personal Kanban talk at the GIS Pro New Orleans, the GIS Pro 2019, yours is GIS Pro there. And my session was, you know, they had me, and it was a packed room, which I was happy with because I got a big ego. I like a big audience. And we actually did a couple of exercises. And one of the exercises kind of asked us to get up and kind of move around. And it got kind of loud. And I think this is why the folks in Toronto were kind of talking about this, is it may become part of lore these days. But it got so loud that the session next door had to come over and tell us to pipe it down.
Oh my gosh.
You know, so, and that, you know, if you're.
That's a little bit unheard of at a conference for a session.
And I wear that like a badge of honor. I'm like, yeah, I was told to shut up.
You got rowdy at the sessions.
Exactly. We got so rowdy, we were told to keep it down. And so I think it just added to this, like everyone kind of, we were all in it together, right? We all got in trouble. It wasn't just me because they were making all the noise. Oh my gosh. So we all got busted. And I think that becomes, like I said, I think it might be part of lore. Like, remember that time when the cops had to come and shut us down?
Shut down the Kanban team.
Yeah, it was fun, and that's where
And how
I
amazing
think
is
this
that?
thing
You
is.
got an entire room at a conference session, all working together and all participating. That's amazing.
And laughing. I mean, there's joy in their faces, So it was. So I think, like I said, I think this works because anybody can do it because it's you. It's one. It's agile for one, and I think that it's that's what I'm doing these days. So most of the talks I give are not GIS or not IT; they're personal Kanban talks.
Yeah. And do you feel like you have to have the board? I mean, I use not Kanban. I use Trello and I use Kanban principles to organize my work. I know when I went from the public sector to the private sector, the first thing I noticed was, oh my gosh, my workload just tripled and I'm expected to get it done in the same amount of time. So I had to use what I had learned in the public sector when I used to work for a city, and I had to apply it. Otherwise I was going to drown. So do you think it matters if you have that physical visual of a board versus just a web page open?
That's strictly up to you. So I'm going to tell you what Tony Ann told me. There's only 2 rules to personal Kanban: visualize your work and limit your work in progress, like establish flow. If you can do that in Trello, fantastic. If you can do that on a physical board, that's fine too. I prefer the physical board because, and I heard her use this term, it's kinetic, right? I'm touching it and I'm moving it. And I think more happens. The dopamine hit is bigger when I get to touch it and move it myself or mark it off. When you go in to log into Trello or, I mean, if that's
I still click my done button and I still take my card and I move it to my done pile, right? So that still happens. Right? Yeah.
And it feels awesome when you do.
It does.
So keep doing it. Right? There's, like I said, there's no rule that says you have to be Post-its or that you have to be Trello. It's just visualize the work and limit your work in progress. If you're doing that electronically, fantastic. If you're doing that analog, old school, that's great too. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Just follow those 2 rules.
Tim Nolan, this has been amazing talking to you. What we did in the first episode and now the second episode here, I really had a great time talking to you. I definitely want to get you on the University of Texas webinar again to do a round 2 of
let's do this
personal
right.
Kanban. We can save the recording this time.
We'll bring the band back together.
So
for
much.
Sure. No, this has been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I as you can tell, I really enjoy talking about this stuff. It's my life. And I really, I think for new GIS people, and that's what I love about the EURISA GIS Pro Conference, is that there's a youth movement there. People are excited about this. And for me, an old timer, I'm really excited about the next generation. I really feel confident that we're all in good hands with this next wave coming through. And just to be able to talk about this stuff, Ollie, it's been fantastic. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Tim.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.